and we've done things maybe perhaps differently than a lot of other writers do. Sometimes to our benefit, sometimes not. I think this might be an interesting topic to just discuss for a little bit, is the idea of, like, at what point are you giving over your scripts, or at what point are you even from a contractual place, let's pull it back, I think, to the business side. You know, one of the things that our producing partner on this wants to do is do a shopping agreement, and I think that
what's a shopping agreement?
Well, that's where I was going with that. Yeah, good question, Jake. So a shopping agreement is kind of exactly what it sounds like. It's an agreement between both producers and the writers who wrote the initial script that allows the producers to shop that project and gives them that right to go out and submit the script on your behalf, to package other elements, to giving them a period of time, not forever. It's not indefinite. Nowadays, they tend to be about 18 months.
Yeah, 12 to 18.
And you know, there are many ways in which you can go about setting up your screenplay. And this is, I think, where my head is going to, especially at this stage with a producer. And we've done things maybe perhaps differently than a lot of other writers do. Sometimes to our benefit, sometimes not. But we haven't entered into many shopping agreements. We haven't entered into many option agreements. An option agreement, similar to a shopping agreement, gives a producer a specific amount of time to go out and try and set up your project, but is far more in depth in terms of how much you would get paid in that event. It gives them far more ownership over the material in terms of when they go out to the town with things, but it also usually requires them to give you a little money up front. Nothing substantial.
So I think probably the primary differences between a shopping agreement and an option agreement basically is money and contractual details. With a shopping agreement, no money exchanges hands, and as part of the shopping agreement, from my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, Ben, the part of it is that each party can negotiate their deal as and when that moment arises.
Correct. Under good faith terms. You can't, or you shouldn't, go into a shopping agreement going, well, if they set it up at Warner Brothers, I'm going to ask for, you know, $5 million, because that's not good faith. You want to the producer will make their deal, you'll make your deal, and hopefully you'll all find a happy medium there.
Whereas with an option, as Ben was stating, you, as the screenwriter, get paid something, an option fee, and your deal is worked out in advance.
Sometimes, I mean, it could be as little as $1.
It can be as little as $1. I think just money has to exchange hands. I might be wrong about that. Is there like a minimum option for a WGA writer?
I've heard of free options. I don't know if the guild has anything.
I wonder.
We could look that up. Free options maybe are only for non-guild writers, and maybe you have to exchange a certain amount of money for an option. I honestly don't know the answer to that question, because we have never entered into one. Although we know lots of screenwriters who have. It is a way, especially when you're starting out, to at least earn some money. But the third way in which you can work with a producer on your project is by not having a written agreement at all, and rather a verbal agreement. In the state of California, verbal agreements can hold up in court. If you have email exchanges, those are proof of your agreement to work with each other. And a lot of it has to do with the stage you're at with a project, and whether that producer is going to help develop that script, whether that producer is coming on board at the initial idea phase, and that you're going to develop the script all the way from the very beginning. And various other factors in terms of why you would choose to do different things. I see a look on your face as though you found something on the Guild website regarding options.
I have. Yes, that's what 14 years of working together does. You can just read my face.
Yes.
Option material. This says theatrical, but again, I'm sure it would apply to streamers as well.
Yeah.
Company may option literary material from a professional writer for a period of up to 18 months upon payment of not less than 10% of minimum. Each renewal period of up to 18 months requires payment of not less than an additional 10% of minimum. So basically 10% of minimum for every 18 months.
Now, the difficult part is that is an option from a major company. And so
to a WGA writer.
But producers are not usually WGA signatories. Companies are. And so I don't believe there is a rule, although I could be wrong. And if there is a rule, then writers break it all the time, which, by the way, happens all the time on lots of writers' rules. But if I don't believe there's a rule that says that you must option material to WGA signatories, because that would be almost impossible then to option to most producers. An option agreement with a signatory company.
Are producers not WGA companies? Are they not? I guess maybe they're not, are they? Yeah.
No, they're not. They're producers, and if they are part of a union, they're PGA. They become employees of the company also. They enter into an agreement with a WGA signatory company.
Yeah, interesting.
So it depends on how much of a studio-ish kind of operation they have.
Yeah.
Some producers probably are WGA signatory.
Yeah, I'm sure.
If they're going to be if you're going to be doing development and you want to hire writers to do development and you want to pay them and they're WGA writers, then you have to be a WGA signatory.
Yeah. Signatory procedures. A company intending to employ, option, or purchase literary material must be a signatory prior to entering into an agreement with the writer in order to obtain the following.
So that's really interesting. So I was wrong, and that actually any producer then that will option material from you must be a signatory. Now,
interesting.
I think that rule is probably broken quite a bit, but I could also be wrong about that as well. I know. I mean, now becoming a WGA signatory, let's just be clear, is not very difficult. And the minimum, by the way, is a minimum based on the size and scale of the production. And when you're still in development,
you don't know what that is.
It's pretty hard to determine. So if you're talking 10% minimum on a low budget movie, you're talking like a couple grand probably.
Sure.
If you're talking about 10% minimum on a high budget feature, then you're probably talking 7-8 grand.
Yeah.
But options can go up to like 20,000.
I think absolutely. Yeah.
We have optioned one piece of material, I think, in our career.
Yeah.
And that was actually The Princess.
We actually did, technically speaking, option that, didn't we?
And the deal was made under the guise of a purchase, but Disney and Fox told our attorney, and maybe this is not true, but it's what their business affairs told our attorney, which was that their customary practices is to option a spec screenplay first.
Pay for a
rewrite.
Pay for a rewrite
with one step. And that then their full purchase price would not be delivered until principal photography. Now that's a way for them to really mitigate their risk. There's probably cases where they don't do that if the writer's big
Yeah,
enough.
I'm sure. Yeah,
They tell your lawyer that this is their customary practices, but if you have enough of a resume, you can get around that kind of
totally.
stuff.
Yeah.
In our situation, we are above scale writers. We ended up making a deal whereby our option agreement was large enough to where we kind of were getting a purchase price,
Basically,
with the option.
Basically, yeah.
And that our purchase price was really like a nice big chunk on top.
Chunk on the other side.
So we felt good about entering into that because what they did was they just made our rewrite a lot more.
Yeah.
In order to kind of cover the bridge, the gap.
Yeah.
But it technically was an option. And what's interesting about that is that had they not moved forward with the princess after, I forget how long that option was for. Let's say it was 12 or 18 months.
Yeah.
And they had the ability to extend that option. But had they not moved forward with it, we would have gotten it back.
Yeah, absolutely right.
And we wouldn't have had to pay anything for it.
Yeah.
And all the money that they paid us up front would be ours to keep. And then we could have gone and sold the princess somewhere else.
We wouldn't have been able to use the rewrite though, would we?
Now that can be negotiated. I believe in that contract, because they're a major studio, they would own all development materials. Yeah. But we could go back to the original spec script.
Yeah.
And go out and sell that original spec script.
Yeah, totally.
And then we would, if we did, we'd have to be very careful about how we then rewrote that for the new studio. Basically saying, look, this was there. They would have the choice. They could buy those materials from, let's say, the Studio A, which happens all the time as well. Yeah. They go, well, how much did they pay you? And then they go to Studio A and say, hey, we'll pay you a couple $100,000, so just so that we have a clean chain of title and we can use whatever ideas came up with.
Yeah, totally.
Or they can say, no, we don't want to pay that money. So you guys just have to
or the company might go
documents.
Or the company might go, we're not selling it to you. We had an experience several years ago, which was for a big company, big streamer. And we developed a adaptation of a comic book as a TV show for said company. It did not end up moving forward with the company. About 6 months later, the producers came back and said, we now have another party interested in producing. This was actually a studio based out of China, and went back to Streamer and said, can we purchase this project back from you? And that Streamer said, no, you cannot.
Yeah.
And so this was based on a comic book.
So we could go back to the comic.
We still had the comic book, but anything that was an adaptation from that comic for the TV version, for the Streamer, would not be allowed. So we had to go back and re-break, like the way that
the whole thing. It was a completely new take on the comic.
Completely new take.
Completely. And quite frankly, it wasn't as good.
Yeah, that's right. It wasn't.
Our best idea was our first version.
It was our first version of it. It's right. I know. It's one of those.
But here's the interesting thing. So on the project that we're working on with Nate, there is a screenplay already. And so our proposal to him was a shopping agreement.
Yeah.
And here's why I believe, and we've just actually been through this with an attorney, with our attorney on one of our screenplays.
Yes.
We thought we were going to enter into an option agreement with the company. They submitted a shopping agreement. There are reasons why we're trying to negotiate things, but this is what our attorney said, and we'd never really experienced this before, which is, in a shopping agreement, you have much more ability to control those development materials.
Yeah.
You can put language into your shopping agreement that says, and we've done this one time before as well with a different producer.
Yeah.
You can put language into your shopping agreement that says any materials, any and all materials that are developed by either the producer with another writer, you with the producer, during that 18 months, at the end of that 18 months, they belong to you. And that can be in writing. And because they're not paying you, don't really
ever argue. That's exactly right. If they want ownership over those development materials, pay us.
They need to pay.
Pay us.
And
again, it's not an enormous amount of money, not for a big company.
Sure.
You know?
No. And in an option, let's be clear, you can negotiate for that in an option as well. It's just harder because they're spending money. And if they're spending money, they want something for it. And the only thing they're going to get for it is those development materials.
Indeed. Indeed.
The third way, which we talked about, which is there's no agreement at all, what we discovered from our attorney in this particular situation is that if you are developing something from the very beginning, from the kernel of an idea, and there is no written word yet, you don't really need either one of those things because there isn't actually anything to shop yet, and there isn't actually anything to option yet. And that producer, because of their contributions, are going to expect to be part of that process no matter what. They are helping develop that from the ground up. Now, could you try and get them to sign a shopping agreement on that? Yes, you can always try.
Yeah.
But it's almost insulting to do so. If you're asking a producer to go, I want you to help me write this script from the very beginning and give me notes from the very beginning. But if you can't sell it, you don't get any credit for any of the work you did. And goodbye. Now, in certain situations, maybe you could get that producer to say, go with God, and I'll sign a document and I'll let you have everything. That depends on your relationship with them. In other situations, if they can't set it up, you might have a new agreement drawn up that says, in the event that you sell it, they get an EP credit and maybe a little chunk of change for the work they did. The reason to do a shopping agreement on a piece of spec material, though, is to avoid the legalities of the notes not being yours.
Yes.
And we have predominantly developed, I guess it's about 50-50. When we've been developing original ideas with producers, some of them have been scripts to begin with, and some of them have just been ideas to begin with.
Yes.
And the scripts in the past, we have not had shopping agreements on until very late in the game. We actually ended up with a shopping agreement on Winter's Night.
We did, I remember.
Because our producer actually wanted to protect themselves.
Yes.
And here's the interesting thing about a shopping agreement. It protects the producer and it protects you.
That's right.
You should not be afraid of them ever.
No. Totally.
People don't like them because they're not making any money and then they can't do anything with their script for that amount of time. My response to that is, if you don't believe the producer can do something with your script, don't fucking give it.
Absolutely shouldn't be working with them in the first place.
Why are you with them?
You
better, if you're gonna get into bed with someone on something that you believe truly could be a movie, well, you better believe in them. And if you believe in them, then what's the harm in giving them 18 months, especially in this climate with how long it takes to put a package together?
Completely.
So I'm a big fan now of shopping agreements for completed material that you're then going to continue to develop with someone.
Indeed.
And if you need the money and you really want an option and it's worth it to you to get $15,000 up front, even if it means having to negotiate out a whole deal, go for it.
Yeah.
We've taken the perspective, Jake, you and I, of going, we would rather not negotiate with you, producer. We'd rather negotiate with the studio because our quotes are large. And we would rather have that versus, we'd rather have the ability to negotiate on our own. And we would rather keep development materials. So we'll bet on ourselves, basically. But other people are not in that situation. And a lot of people are still working support jobs. And the idea of a $10,000 option coming in is big.
It is.
So I think they're both great. And I also think, depending on the producer that you're working with, if it's early enough in the stage, don't push for a contract. It just kind of makes people go,
okay, well,
you want to get lawyers involved now? We just started working together. So that's it. Development.
That's the business. That's the business talk.